Alrighty. That's that. Okay, where are we? Blah, 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 blah. Random stuff. Avian. Avian is where we are. So Avian 0.4 released today. Hey, Bob, how's it going? Avian 0.4 released today. And we're going to go through some of the highlights. Check it out. Probably will install into a project. I don't know if any of the changes are really API relevant, or rather, I don't know that many of the changes are really breaking in an API sense. So I'm not sure there's going to be a whole lot to care about in terms of like upgrading, but we can do an upgrade on some project. Avian being a physics library for Bevy. Every release of Avian tends to be extremely featureful. So in this one, we've got performance improvements, overhauled forces, and joints as headline. Avian 0.4, biggest release yet. Several new features, quality of life improvements, important bug fixes. Apparently 3 times as fast, which is very, very, very cool. I was not having Avian performance issues in my projects, but, you know, I'll take 3 times faster. I think everybody will take 3 times faster. You're excited because it was holding you back from upgrading to 0.17. Yes. Yes, that's one of the big things. Avian is kind of like the default for a lot of people for physics for Bevy. And it having a 0.17 release is great because it means that a bunch of people can actually upgrade now. So better scaling for multi-core hardware. Solver bodies, graph coloring, and simulation islands. Simulation islands, I've seen a lot of chatter about the development of them, as well as some prototypes in the showcase channel and things like that. So islands are used for a much improved sleeping and waking system, reducing overhead for large game worlds with many resting bodies. That's awesome. The Force APIs got overhauled. Haven't looked at them yet. Know that the old APIs were a little bit cumbersome to use, so excited to look into that. Previously, it was kind of like external force, and you chose whether it was persistent or not, and it was a little bit confusing. So I'm excited to see what the redesign is like. Joint improvements is very cool. I don't use a ton of joints, but I was trying to use them, so let's say like a month or two ago for a project. Voxel colliders is very, very, very cool. I don't do really any voxel stuff. Voxel stuff, like, kind of does do well on YouTube. Like, people like voxels. A bunch of people who use Bevy build voxel renderers and voxel-based stuff. It hasn't been a thing that I've gotten into all that much so far. But voxels are not just for, let's say, Minecraft clones, but also other volumetric data. So that's very cool. 0.17 support, of course. Contact API improvements. Contact data now provides access to world space points, normal speeds, and more accurate contact impulses. That's very cool. And then a benchmarking CLI. Avian has a new CLI tool for benchmarking various scenes and profiling multi-threaded scaling. Cool. So let's get into it. So 3 times faster. We already saw that. I guess this is a pyramid 2D example, 2,850 boxes. That's milliseconds per step on the left, threads on the right. So the thread scaling over 8 threads. And just a huge improvement over 0.3, which is cool. This is a very deep dive, it's saying. So the force overhaul section is probably the first user-facing section, but I'm still curious as to what's going on here. So we're definitely going to look into the stuff before that. It's also really nice because John Dolph puts a lot of effort into these release notes, which is really great as somebody who is not like a physics specialist, because it means that when they talk about the work that they've done in depth like this, it's basically presenting it to people like me, who are not intimately familiar with the mechanics, which is a nice way to keep up to date and gain a little bit of knowledge on the physics side of things. So in past releases, Solver was bottlenecked. Rigid body query. I've seen this query before. This is the rigid body query. So if you don't know, you can derive query data on Bevy structs and stuff and use that repeatedly as queries, which is very cool because it allows you to kind of like package up a bunch of stuff into like a reusable little snippet, throw that into your queries, and you can just say, hey, give me the stuff that I want. Give me the stuff that I want. Hey, John Dolph, how's it going? Good to see you again. Thanks for doing the release. Thanks for everything. And obviously all the work you put in, because Avian is really fantastic. And it would be a very different ecosystem if it didn't exist. So Avian 4 refactors solvers to use dedicated solver body and solver body inertia types. Optimized for memory, locality, and performance, which is cool. Initialized with body data before the solver, and results are written back after the solver. So 2D, you can already see these are so much smaller. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, we'll call it, queries, 20 if you're in 2D. Okay, so solver body, linear velocity, angular velocity, position, rotation, and then some flags. Only awake dynamic bodies and kinematic bodies have an associated solver body. Okay, makes sense. Static and sleeping bodies do not move. So they use the default. That makes sense. If a solver doesn't have access to the position or rotation of static bodies, how can we compute constraint anchors? Okay, so the options were delta positions and rotations. So base anchors and other necessary positional data in world space, computing the updated anchors during substeps, or full positions and rotations. Okay, yeah, delta or the full data. That makes sense. This requires storing anchors in world space for static bodies and sleeping bodies, and in local space for dynamic bodies. So the option was deltas, because that reduces round off errors when bodies are far from the origin. Interesting. I don't do a lot of like big spacey kind of stuff. But I wonder if that, well, I guess big space moves the origin, really, is what it does. So I guess this would help with things that are still far from the origin, even after you used big space to move the origin. Mixing world space and local space, depending on body type, would be quite confusing. Absolutely. I think getting up to date on like what spaces are, which ones exist, how to use them, and then which things they relate to is like a whole thing. And a lot of people coming to Bevy and using Avian are not people who would know offhand world space, local space, if they were given just a random transform, for example. So constraint refactoring and switching to the solver bodies. Base of 75 boxes. This is with parallel enabled, so a huge drop. I assume all of these charts are going to be huge drops for 0.3 to 0.4 after seeing the first one. Okay, so parallel solver with graph coloring. Solver bodies, I think this is an internal link. Yeah, this is a link to the blog post. A Gauss-Seidel method solver. That's something I've never heard of, so let's take a look at that for a second. Numerical linear algebra, Gauss-Seidel method. Method of successive displacement, iterative method to solve a system of linear equations. Cool. Can be applied to any matrix with non-zero elements on the diagonals. And convergence is only guaranteed if the matrix is either strictly diagonally dominant, symmetric, and positive definite. Okay. Cool. AX equals B, classic linear algebra kind of like setup there. I'm not going to go too deep into the actual algorithm because I'm not actually going to write it. To parallelize the solver without race conditions. Hey, looking forward to a Monday coding mayhem. Hey, Anders, it's good to see you. We're going through Avian 0.4 release today. Very exciting. So roughly speaking, there are 2 or 3 common approaches to parallelize without race conditions. Simulation islands, which I think are definitely being used. Graph coloring and I guess hybrid. So either grouping bodies so that the islands can be computed independently, or what is this? Constraints are assigned to colors. This is coloring as in terms of like not actual visual colors, but just this and that are different. So no adjacent constraints in the constraint graph share the same color. Yep. Certain body can only appear once in each color, and all constraints within a given color can be solved in parallel. Yeah, okay, so vaguely sounds similar, except one is grouping bodies, and one is coloring the actual graph of bodies. Okay. So I can see how these would work together, where one would be coarse and one would be pretty granular. Or could be. So 0.4 implements parallel constraint solver with graph coloring. So option 2. Updated incrementally using a greedy algorithm. This makes global graph coloring feasible even for huge worlds with tens of thousands of contacts. That's a lot of contacts. So the example says each contact constraint has one or more contact points with the same color. So these 2 are contact points between these 2 bodies, and yellow would be here, and then red would be these 2, orange would be these 2. So it kind of colors these contact points, and they're different in different groups. Cool. Is this a demo or is this a this is just a PNG, so there's nothing to see here. You really appreciate the release notes. You love learning more about the stuff through other experiences. Yeah, the release notes here are fantastic. I can't really give them enough praise because there's a lot here that's really great. So there's a note about static bodies here, and the bottoms are all the same graph color. Static body is not considered part of the graph coloring. Okay. Scaling to a larger scene. Start building a bunch of triangles. Okay. Graph coloring algorithm based on box 2D SIMD matters. This is something I'll probably read later. Avian supports more than one manifold per contact pair. Cool. Manifolds we went over in the last release video, actually, which are the plane that makes up the contact points. Single contact pairs manifolds can be split across several colors. Interesting. More than one manifold per contact pair. So that would be like if you had a U-shaped thing contacting a ball. Is that what that implies? There could be 2 manifolds, one for each of sign of like the edges of the U connecting with the ball. Graph and color. Cool. As always, the actual implementation can be found on GitHub. That I think is just a link to a source file. Constraint graph. Cool. With a little bit more references to papers and stuff, which is cool. Popping in to say thanks for the cool stuff. You first came to community. Good luck with stream. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Thanks for popping by. Okay. Graph and graph coloring. And TLDR, this is before and after graph coloring? Yeah. Sweet. I mean, the chart looks good, right? I forget when this got added, this little like debug thing, but this debug thing is really, really cool. I think it was last release. But I kind of start forgetting when things get added because I watch a bunch of PRs and stuff going. Oh, sweet. So that looks pretty good, honestly. Nice. Yeah, it was in 0.3. Yeah. So narrow phase significantly faster. Solver is over 3 times as fast. 2 times total performance. And the difference tends to grow the more contacts there are. Cool. Which is great for a physics engine. And there's more to do. Joints don't participate in graph coloring. SIMD optimizations. Cool. And then simulation islands. So simulation islands mentioned for solver parallelization in the last section. But apparently they have an even more important function, sleeping and waking. Old Avian used per body sleeping. That only allows sleeping for dynamic bodies that are not in contact with each other and not connected via joints. Ooh, do we get more capacity for sleeping? Like a stack of, yeah, okay. So a stack of things can now sleep, which is cool. I feel like at one point I built like a, not a Tetris game, but like a block stack, like a Jenga tower. And that was definitely, I locked down the axes for that so they wouldn't like move and fall over. Okay, simulation islands then are potentially a group of contacting entities. This one's moving, this one's rest, these are at rest. Persistent islands for sleeping and waking, which means that they're persistent across time steps, merge when constraints are added between different islands, and split heuristically. Cool. This is a video. Let's play the video. Oh, that's so cool. That's so cool. So these are the simulation island boxes, I guess, is what's happening here. Things that get far enough away from each other or come to rest near each other are grouped into the same box. Nice. That's very cool. Nice. I don't know why, but I like the blue color that you chose for the cubes too. I don't know where you came up with that blue color, but I like it. It looks good. Okay, so Simulation Islands article and Box2D. So this, I think, we haven't looked at all. But that's very cool. This is also another very long blog post, so we're not going to go into it at all. But very, very cool that these are linked from the Avian post. So persistent is extremely fast. The downside is that it needs to persist state, which can complicate networking. Interesting. Cool. So we get into, after this, force overhaul. So this is the first of the user-facing API changes. These are the old APIs: external force, external torque, etc. Self-described as limited and cumbersome to use. They were a little bit cumbersome. I don't know what the new API is yet, though. Two new types of API: components for constant forces and a forces helper query data. Okay. So anything that's constant or persistent is going to be a component on an entity, and anything that is like instantaneous will be able to access via query data and then presumably apply that frame. Yes, absolutely. Love for John Dolphin in the chat. So constant forces. So now the components, these are components, right? Yeah. Constant force, constant torque. I like this a lot better. It makes it very clear what is being constant and what isn't. So if it has the component, it is happening. If it doesn't have the component, it is not happening. So these are global, and then there's also local. Interesting. Which forward does it use? I guess it doesn't matter because you would pass in an XYZ, but after all the GLTF conversations about flipping coordinates and stuff. So same across time. That makes total sense. I guess this is constant force new. The docs are probably already up, right? Provided Rust doc didn't crash like it always does for Bevy. So this is a tuple with a vector in it. And you can access the internal vector. So you could stick this component on and then modify the vector in a system if you wanted to. It doesn't seem like that's the particularly intended approach, but it looks available at least. The forces are only constant in the sense that they persist across time steps. They can still be modified in systems like normal. Yeah. I could have read 2 sentences later instead of looking at the docs. Forces helper. So that's query data. We talked about query data a little bit earlier when we were looking at the giant rigid body query data. This is how you use a query data. So you just query for forces. I don't know what forces is or like what it contains. And I'm curious. So let's find out. Private. But I'm going to look at the source code. So you get position, rotation, linear velocity, angular velocity, mass, center of mass, locked axes. What is integration? Velocity integration data. Okay. Accumulated local acceleration, sleep timer, and is sleeping. Cool. So I assume that these are exposed to via functions if they are private. Add it to a query and use the associated methods. Where are the functions? Trade implementations, auto trade implementations. Rigid body forces has the functions? Yeah, okay. So apply force at point, etc. So you can get the position, rotation, velocity, angular velocity. Looks like most of the stuff we saw is exposed here. Cool. So forces apply force, global positive y direction of the entity. Is this global actually apply force of 10 newtons in the, I assume that's newtons. I actually have no idea. 10 newtons in the positive y direction of the in the positive y direction. So this is world space. Because otherwise I think it would have said the entity is y direction. Apply continuously during the physics step and cleared automatically after the step is complete. Cool. So basically like a frame. Apply forces and impulses at specific points in the world. If the point is not aligned with the global center of mass, it will apply a torque to the body. So if you offset into the corner of a cube and hit it, it'll spin. You could implement radial gravity that pulls rigid bodies toward the world origin with a system like the following. So radial gravity, this is a query for forces in global transform. Given the global transform, it normalizes the translation and makes it negative. Interesting. And then apply linear acceleration of gravity. Transform translation. Normalizer 0, just for the direction. That makes sense. And then in the opposite direction of the location. So what is... Forces must be on an entity with what? What can I query forces on? Any rigid body? That would be my guess. That would make the most sense. By default, applying forces to sleeping bodies will wake them up, which makes total sense. To avoid this, called non-waking. So what happens if you apply a force to a sleeping body? It kind of just wouldn't apply, right? Hey, Yuto, how's it going? Hey, Chris, any fun here? We're looking at Avian 0.4 came out today. So if you were waiting for it to upgrade, it's out. Interesting that you can apply a force to a body without waking it. I don't know what that would do. My mental model of this is that sleeping bodies wouldn't move if you hit them and they didn't wake up. If you hit them and they wake up, presumably they simulate. But I don't actually know what the restricted state of sleeping is here. Okay, so that's forces. The force API improvements look great. This is significantly more understandable. It's significantly more teachable too. So if I'm going to go and tell somebody about how this works. Yeah, basically just ignore it for sleeping bodies if you're using non-waking. Yeah, interesting. So it's like effectively the same as just not applying it. Makes me wonder like what the API is for. Because if it's going to ignore the force anyway, I guess it says it doesn't wake the body up. So theoretically, if it was already waking, then it would move. You're not turning sleep on. You're just saying, I'm not going to wake it up. Is that accurate? So like if it was already in motion and it got hit, it would move. But if it was sleeping and had come to rest already, it would just stay where it was. You're doing some game jams. What is sleeping bodies? Sleeping bodies as in like sleeping rigid bodies. So rigid bodies that are put kind of into a quote unquote sleeping state and thus don't have the full simulation being run on them. In this case, it's we're talking about the new Force APIs. So there's an API where if you have a sleeping body that like isn't moving and you apply a force to it, you can choose to not wake the body up with that force. Okay, joint improvements. New joint solver coming at some point in the future. So reference frames, damping, joint forces, disabling collisions between jointed bodies. Interesting. Querying for joints between entities through a joint graph. Sweet. Is this like a, I don't want to call it a relationship because I don't think we can really do graphs in our relationship system in Bevy right now. But yeah, like joint relations effectively. Basically disabled collision shape. Yeah, it's like the disabled rigid body would mean that it's not getting like tossed around anywhere. Like it's come to rest. New joint solver, more joint types, joint motors. Joint motors is cool. Motors are something that I was vaguely unfamiliar with before starting to do game development stuff. Do sleeping bodies have dreams? I don't know. I want to make a robot quote, or whatchamacallit. I can't remember the name of the movie. Harrison Ford. I'm totally blanking. Dystopian Harrison Ford movie with replicants. You want to join the sleeping gang now? I always want to join the sleeping gang. I want to go take a nap. Okay, so a very common problem users of Avian have encountered with joints is that you can only configure the joint's anchor position, but not the relative orientation. So for a fixed joint, this means the orientation of the two bodies were fixed to be equal, and you couldn't attach them together at a 45-degree angle, for example. Okay, so basically, is this an entity hierarchy? Is this like entity with two children? And they're placed offset from the root? Blade Runner, yes. Yes. Do sleeping bodies dream of wireframe sheep? Yes, exactly. Glad y'all got it. I would have never remembered the movie name. Okay, each joint has two reference frames formed by an anchor and a basis, one for each body. So rigid body, which means that the only one that I don't know if it's an entity or not is the root here. I think it has to be. The anchor is the joint's attachment point relative to the center of the body. Relative to the center of the body. So we're calling the rigid body on the anchor here. Well, the basis is the joint's base rotation relative to the orientation. All right, I don't actually need these headphones. I don't listen to myself while I'm on stream, so. Two reference frames are aligned in world space. Translational and rotational offset between the bodies is considered to be 0. I see the image. I feel like these are two rigid bodies with a parent. Top thing is not an entity. It just represents where the joint's anchor is relative to the bodies. Okay, so there's a theoretical like joint that is relating these together. So you've got rigid body entity over here, rigid body entity over here, and then you've got the configuration such that Avian will keep them related to each other. So why is the center there? If that's the case. Because like, wouldn't this, if I was going to draw like a bounding box around these, it wouldn't include this dot, right? Or is that dot, okay. We're pushing the anchor up 5 and over 2. So the anchor would normally be, I don't know, here. To the right of this rectangle, maybe? You were kind of struggling to visualize this in any reasonable way? Yeah, I hear you. So revolute joint. I assume that this is the code for the thing above. World space anchor of 5.2 and rotate the second body's local frame by 45 degrees. So second body's local frame. This is a 90-degree angle. Second body's local frame by 45. So this is the first one offset 2 then? With local basis to 45 degrees. Yeah. So body 1, body 2. There's a non-entity connection between them. That is a point in space. That point in space can be moved relative to the center of the combined rigid bodies. Where does it say this? Each body connected by a joint. The base translational and rotational offset for each body. By default, the offsets are 0. I feel like a before and after would have been helpful here. I don't know what the before would have been, though. So if the world space anchor is 5.2, then we can just place this anchor anywhere in the world. So there is no center, so to speak, for that point to be. The anchor is the joint's attachment point relative to the center of the body. Each joint has 2 reference frames formed by an anchor and a basis, one for each body. So what are we calling the joint here? Reference frames formed by an anchor and a basis. So the anchor reference frame I feel like I'm going to just have to play with this and see what it does. Yeah, but it doesn't say body 1 or body 2. And there is no like ruler for the coordinate space, so I can't make any assumptions. One of the things when it comes to certain graphs or certain diagrams is if it doesn't show me, especially when it comes to math, right? I don't know if you've ever seen a math puzzle where it's like, here is a shape and everything looks like it has right angles, but that's just because it was drawn like that as a visualization. And they aren't actually right angles or something like that. I've come to distrust mathematical diagrams from a visual perspective. So like this looking like it's 90 degrees doesn't mean it's 90 degrees. I do think that these coordinates are X and Y. It's interesting that it looks like X and Y are different, or like rotated differently, rotated 90 degrees. I think this is just something that I'm going to have to play with. It definitely isn't clicking for me at the moment. In many physics engines, specific axes are tied to certain constraints depending on the joint type. For example, the x-axis is the common de facto slider axis for prismatic joints, and the local frames must be rotated to get other behavior. Weren't a fan of the implicitness. Kept the axis configurable. For example, prismatic joint with slider axis. Love that. That sounds great. So let's do this. Let's start with not Bevy. My default is to go to Bevy. Okay, revolute joint. Revolute joint is a joint or hinge that prevents any relative movement between two bodies, except for rotation about the hinge axis at the pivot point defined by the joint anchor. Okay, so this visualization then is locking these two bodies in relation to each other. And if we rotated it, it would rotate around this anchor point as a whole unit. I know that code example is unrelated to the image. Whoops. Okay, then I won't read too much into that either. You haven't looked into Avian yet. You've hand-rolled GPU-based physics in your own end body sim. You've Rapier and it's great, but it didn't fit your needs. How is Avian? Pros, cons? Thanks. Avian's great. If you have your own GPU implemented physics for a simulation, that doesn't necessarily sound like the same use case as Avian's filling. John Dolph probably has a better answer on this than I do. But I'm not aware of any GPU powered compute in Avian right now relating to any sort of physics. I saw John Dolph talking about it in the math and physics channel and whatnot, but I think if you've hand rolled your own GPU based physics, and you've done that based on one of those papers that came out that, explained how to do it, it doesn't necessarily strike me as the same use case. I would say Avian is a good general purpose physics engine for a game. And it works really well with Bevy and fits with Bevy idioms really, really well. So for example, earlier we were talking about forces. To have a persistent force 0.4, you just insert the component and that force is persistent across frames. If you want it to stop, remove the component, that kind of thing. Okay, damping. Each joint type stores its own, or stored previously, its own damping coefficients. Actual damping logic is not joint specific, and not all joints need damping. Okay. So if you want damping, put joint damping on it. Makes sense. Forces. Details of joint forces are solver specific. Ultimately, users want to read a force and torque vector. And this has now been generalized as joint forces as a component. Constraint solver writes to it and users can read. It's not added automatically. Interesting. So if I want to read the vectors for the force and the torque, I would place that component and then query it later. An example of where this may be useful is breaking joints when their forces or torques exceed some threshold. Let's see, break joints, query for entities with joint forces without joint disabled. For all of them, if the joint force's force length is greater than the break threshold, disable the joint. Or presumably you could like remove the joint components and have them spring all over the place or something. Okay, disabling joint collision. Disabling collision between the attached bodies and a joint between wheel and car. Thanks for the respective Chris. Have a good stream. Yeah, you too. I mean, have a good rest of your day anyway. In past releases, implementing a desired behavior property required custom hooks. Yeah. Avian 4 joint collision disable component for disabling collisions between bodies that are jointed together. Okay, so anything that is jointed together just doesn't get collision, which is very cool. Joint graph, tracking how bodies are connected. This is the relationship stuff that we were talking about earlier. I don't think this is actually relationships because I don't think that like we don't have many-to-many relationships, so this is probably something vaguely related, but not the same. Bodies attached to entity, sweet. Cool, so you can just kind of like move down a chain of joints. How does Avian compare to other game engines physics like Source Engine? I see a lot of features. Is something still missing? I think John Dolph would probably have the better answer for that. I'm not intimately familiar with Source Engine's physics. So a comparison between them is kind of out of my... Let's see. I don't think this exists in the README, but let's check. Yeah. I also don't know if this exists in the documentation at all. Table contents. I feel like comparisons to other engines is kind of like a thing that quickly goes out of date and is hard to keep up to date. Because once you write that, you not only have to keep it up to date for the thing that you built, but for everything that you referenced. So I wouldn't be surprised if that didn't exist here. But it only existed in kind of like John Dolph's mind. Comparison to Rapier, but no comparison to Source Engine or anything like that. What is the current comparison according to the maintainer? Rapier is the biggest and most used physics engine in the Rust ecosystem. Is currently the most mature and feature-rich option. Yeah, I guess because Avian is Bevy focused, Rapier will always be bigger in that sense, unless Bevy outweighs all use cases of Rust physics. General built-in missing physics engine features: multi-body joints, articulations, 6-degree of freedom joints, joint motors, and a built-in kinematic character controller, according to John Dolph. Yeah. I think one of the reasons that I use Avian is this like built for Bevy with Bevy kind of thing. I really enjoy the development of the APIs fitting really well into the Bevy world. Decoupling solver internals, very cool. All XPBD logic is now gated behind the joints feature. which means you can disable it if you're concerned about patenting. For those that don't know, Avian used to be Bevy XPBD. This is a long time. This is a long time ago now, isn't it? Imagine in 5 years from now, I'm going to go back in the day when Bevy XPBD existed. Okay. Theoretically possible to implement your own custom solver for Avian's joints while using the existing API. That's really cool. I assume that nobody's done that, and that's why you're saying it's theoretical. But to try to port some of current Bevy Rapier URDF simulations to Avian, since it's 0.4 now. URDF is robotics, right? Like robotic arms and stuff. Yada, yada, yada. Decoupled design. Wonderful. Great. Voxel colliders. Okay. Like I was saying earlier, I don't really do voxel stuff. I've never made a voxel video on this channel. You won't catch me working on my Minecraft clone in the off hours. The off hours that I don't have. But voxel colliders. So Parry introduced a new voxel shape. And I assume that that just got exposed through Avian. Which is just cool. That's sweet. Cool, you're asking me because Bevy and Avian reminds you of playing around in Gmob, which is source engine based. Nice. Yeah, I'm not too familiar with source engine in general, so I can't really draw my own comparisons there for you. Cool. Voxel colliders can be created manually or from a point cloud. There's that new Bevy point cloud crate. Or from a mesh. Voxelized tri-mesh from mesh. That's wild. Cool. Some limitations, collisions against composite shapes, like triangle meshes, are not yet supported. Cool. Good to know. Debug assertions can sometimes cause crashes. It'd be like that sometimes. Bevy 0.17 support. Yes, obviously. 0.17 is out now, so it makes sense. Collision events. Avian 0.4 combines buffered and observer events under the collision start and collision end events. They implement both message and event. That's the first library that I've seen doing this. The first library for 0.17 with the new message and event and entity event stuff that I've seen doing this, which is a huge qualification, but that's really interesting. So they can be consumed with both the message reader and observer APIs. So that means they're being fired for both. Is that accurate? Right? Because this would be... Yeah. So they're being fired for both for sure. So let's... Narrow phase, trigger collision events. Trigger collision events. Context. Vec. Collect events. Started. Trigger the events, training and process. This is all the triggers. I assume there's a different place then for... Started drain world trigger event. And then update narrow pay is probably where that happens. Yeah. Narrow phase update. Cool. It's pretty sweet, honestly, that you can choose either or. I wonder if there's any overhead to triggering a bunch of observers that don't have listeners. I don't know if they don't have listeners. I don't know if internally Avian listens to it or not. The term collision event or contact event is extremely common. With the naming changes, begs the question whether should we abandon this standard and start calling the message version a collision message. From your point of view, the answer is no. Difference is subtle, but instead of saying that the type is a message, we say that it is written as a message. Defining factor of the type is that it's fundamentally a collision event, even if it can be sent as a message. Yeah, I agree with that. That makes sense to me. Are there any plans for upstreaming Avian to Bevy? You'll have to ask John Dolph. I think the upstreaming general plan, which is not a concrete plan and nobody's really like committed to it, so take this with a grain of salt. I think the plan is to rebuild collision primitives and collider primitives inside of Bevy, such that those primitives could theoretically then be used by multiple implementations. And how far that goes is up in the air because it hasn't started yet. That was being done in 0.32 for entities with collision events enabled, but they were separate types before. Yeah, okay, makes sense. Is Avian part of the Bevy project or distinct? It is distinct. It is maintained by the person who sent the message above you, John Dolph. John Dolph is heavily involved in the Bevy project and ecosystem in general. So while not being like an official Bevy crate, Avian is very much in the Bevy ecosystem in a very strong way. Collision event observer before and after. This is pressure plates. Yeah, pressure plate, trigger, on. Yep. All the triggers got renamed to on, so that's about it. For collision started, collider 1, collider 2. Cool. Makes sense. System sets. Bevy 0.7 adopted a consistent naming convention for system sets. Oh, good. You say you did this. I was like, ooh, wonder who did that. Where applicable, system sets should now be suffixed with systems. I think that makes sense, yeah. So everything is systems now. Collider constructor hierarchy names. Bevy 0.17 changed the way name works for GLTF mesh primitives. Instead of mesh name.primitive index, it is now mesh name.material name. That was a 0.17 change, huh? I feel like I remember this change happening earlier. Name components were previously stored as mesh name plus primitive index. What? You mean if there were multiple materials applied to... This is only if you applied multiple materials to a mesh. Because Bevy doesn't support multi-material meshes, so it has to split them up. And when it split them up, it was generating these names. So now it generates with the material name, which is the key piece of information. So I think this is a good change, actually. Not that anybody asked, it already merged and released. If you were relying on the previous value of the name component on meshes, use the new GLTF mesh name component instead. GLTF mesh name. Yeah, because Bevy splits it up and has to postfix the number on it. I think that's a deficiency of Bevy specifically. But this is not an Avian API change. This is just a string change. 3D friction stability fix. Yeah. Nice. Just towering blocks. It's still a wobble, but you believe this is largely due to gravity being fairly high for such small objects, and 6 substeps isn't enough to keep it fully stable. With a lower gravity, it's perfectly stable. Cool. Relying on the name component sounds dangerous. You guess this might be a nice workaround to do some post-processing on GLTF meshes. So names, how do we frame this? GLTF has internal references, right? Internal references in GLTF is indices. That's it. It's all you get. Internally, you can only refer to things as indices. So if you're going to have a node and have a child of that node that is a mesh, you're going to have an index that represents the mesh entry in the mesh array that will be used as the child there. So those indices are really the only internal reference. The names are the intended external usage. See if I can. Indices and names. Here we go. So in the spec, indices and names, right? Entities of a GLTF asset are referenced by their indices and corresponding arrays. These are internal references, whereas indices are used for internal GLTF references. So you're not supposed to use those externally, right? At all. You're never supposed to use that number. Names are optional, and they are used for application-specific use cases. So if you're going to reference a GLTF object from outside of that GLTF file, you're supposed to use the name. There is no cross GLTF references or anything like that. That does mean if you're in Blender and you change the name and your code relied on a specific name, that will break. That's how that works. But a name is the right thing. I actually want to change the GLTF floater to use names instead of indices, because using indices is actually incorrect. There's been a lot of conversation around like trying to add names in or something like that, but I think actually using indices is just flat out incorrect. It's also problematic because GLTF arrays could reorder based on anything that you do, say, inside of Blender or any other digital content creation tool. Like the indices aren't stable. So if you use an index in your code and you're importing a GLTF file that's being exported by some, artist or like some pipeline processing or whatever, there's no real good way for you to guarantee that index 0 is going to be used. Regardless of shoulds, names are easier to keep stable across changes than indices. Absolutely. Yes, 100%. So I think that at some point when I get around to it, I'm going to suggest that we use names instead of indices in the loaders, in the loader APIs, because it makes more sense. And that's how they're supposed to be used. Contact API improvements, world space points. Contact stored local 1 and local 2, closest points between the surfaces of 2 bodies in local space. However, users reading collision data typically only want a single point to determine where the contact happened. Yeah, that makes sense. Avian adds a point property for the world space contact point. This is effectively the midpoint between the closest points of the contacts. Okay. I assume that you can still access, you can still access the other versions. Contact impulses. Impulse applied at the normal at a contact point is stored in contact point normal impulse. So we're into bug fixes a little bit at this point. Collider constructor caching. I feel like Jan's been talking about caching those colliders forever, and I just felt like this was around forever. Okay, in past releases, each collider was generated separately, but in practice, scenes tend to use many instances of the same meshes. Yes, that is what collection instances are in Blender if you're trying to export those. Generating the same collider separately for each mesh instance can result in a lot of unnecessary work. Absolutely. Caching for collider constructors. Generated shape is added as a collider cache resource, and when a mesh with the same asset ID is encountered later, the shape is simply fetched from the cache rather than generating a new collider from scratch. Cool. Wonderful. This is Foxtrot before. And this is Foxtrot after. Nice. Collider constructor ready events. Oh, they made it in. Nice. So if you have collider constructor or collider constructor hierarchy, and you do something that is fairly expensive, if you have a really massive mesh that you're calculating a collider for, this is happening after these components are inserted. So it could take more than a frame, right? It could happen, quote unquote, later. So when those have been correctly processed for collider constructor ready, it's for an individual collider. When that collider is inserted, there's now an event that fires. And for the hierarchy, it's just whenever it finishes, but it doesn't necessarily track success, which is interesting. I think that's fine. I think any errors you would see kind of like in development. Having events is really nice though, because if you want to like spawn a player in and you have a collider constructor hierarchy and the thing under your player has to generate a collider at some point for it to land on before it spawns, this is now a good way to do that. Benchmarking CLI. A lot of noise outside. With an increasing focus on performance and multi-threading, Avian needs better tooling for benchmarks. Physics diagnostics. These are the panel that we looked at earlier, I think. Great for runtime profiling. Missing a tool for a suite of dedicated benchmarks. Run benchmarks. Yada yada, different targets, produce CSV files. Avian implements its own CLI tool for running 2D and 3D benchmarks that is not part of the crate itself, but can be found in the GitHub repository. Is that the Avian? Yeah, Avian benches. Cool. Name of the benchmark to run, threads, steps, repeat, list. Cool, cool, cool. Dumps out some CSV output. And that presumably is how all of the graphs in this post got generated. Cool. And then we just have a bunch of like arbitrary things, fixes, things like that. Avian always taking great leaps. I feel like every release. So like 0.4 is out and great, and 0.5 is also going to be out and great. So future work. Wide SIMD. Graph coloring is currently used as of this release. Potentially making use of SIMD, this looks like. Portable SIMD. Glam has SIMD, although I thought they were thinking about getting rid of it. Glam wide is presumably the wide SIMD. Yep. Cool, cool, cool. Here's a sneak peek of a Glam wide and work in progress portable SIMD for a wide ray sphere intersection algorithm. So ray sphere intersection, ray origin, ray direction, sphere origin, sphere radius squared. And this just looks like normal code to me, which is great. I mean, SIMD GT is a little bit call that normal code or not, but improved multi-threading, cool. Forte mentioned, nice. There's a talk that was given by Nth Sensor on Forte. If anybody's interested in that kind of thing, it was a great talk. Luckily, thread pools. BVH broad phase for large scenes or tens of thousands of colliders after improvements to the solver and sweeping systems, now mostly bottlenecked on sweep and prune broad phase. Cool. OBVHS. OBVHS is just the one that everybody uses. Griffin made it and everybody just like, it works. It's good. Every time I see something about bounding volume hierarchies, it is OBVHS. Ooh, PEC. This is Parry replacement. So 0.4 release cycle focus was performance and joint APIs, and more focus on PEC moving forward. Sweet. GJK and EPA implementations, analytic raycasting for Bevy shapes. That feels like an upstreamable kind of thing. Implement shape casting, geometric queries, decompositions, and then these two things are really interesting. Having collider types that could be used with Bevy's asset system such that they can be pre-generated for your scene and then loaded in rather than generated at runtime, blocking, people from playing the game. There's some other work going on for some sub-asset work and stuff, which is very cool, which should end up coalescing with this quite well. COACD, fast and accurate convex decomposition. Typical collision detection algorithms work best with convex shapes. Because of this, games commonly use either convex holes or break up meshes into several convex parts. Manual process, historically, yep. But automatic decomposition. So Collider Constructor has a convex decomposition in it. You can just like apply that in Blender or something. When it gets spawned, Avian will take care of it, generating the collider at runtime, which is sick. One option. So Avian supports VHACD, which I don't know the acronym. This is VHACD. What is the acronym? Well, I guess we'll never know. Voxelized hierarchical approximate convex decomposition. Want something that is not tied to parry? Yes, that would be cool. Oh, you know what? This is another case of me needing to like read 2 lines forward, and it would have told me what the acronym was. Produces higher quality decompositions. Cool, cool, cool. Oh, this was the mesh slicing stuff. Okay, so John Dolph did a bunch of like Fruit Ninja style mesh slicing experiments. I don't know about a bunch, but so that was for this implementation. That makes sense. Nothing like a good watermelon slice. Cool, cool, cool. For several consecutive releases in a row, we've been meaning to rework joint APIs. New joint solver remains unfinished, especially motors. AVBD was recently published. That was only like a month ago, right? AVBD, is there a date on this? 2025? Cool. Call it 2025. Recently. Mixed bag. So AVBD doesn't handle high mass ratios and stiffness, vertex coloring. Especially for joints, AVBD seems really impressive. Cool. Some mention of GPU physics. Tuning the algorithm is required for good behavior. Yeah. It's always nice to have an algorithm that doesn't need to be tuned all that much to just work anyway. So still more work to do. AVBD maybe not the magical cure, but more work happening, which is cool. And then obviously, if you enjoy Avian, if you use Avian, if you like any of this work, go support John Dolph. They have GitHub sponsors, which you can find in the post. So that's it for Avian. I think that there's not too much in terms of changes, really. Like there's a couple of forced API changes, a couple of components, a couple of new components and stuff. But overall, I don't feel like this would be. I at least when I updated other stuff that I had Avian running with, it definitely did not. Oh, this is going to freak out, isn't it? I've noticed that after I updated Yabai, it doesn't handle monitor connection and reconnection very well, which is really unfortunate. So I use 3 monitors when I'm doing this week in Bevy, like data stuff. Arrived in time for the disco. Hello, folks. Yeah. Are there any conceptual reasons why Avian couldn't be as fast or faster than Rapier or other physics libraries? Nope. Not that I'm aware of. I am 0% aware of anything that is preventing Avian from like reaching high levels of performance at some point. Obviously, work needs to go in to use you know, the new algorithms and stuff, which is exactly what John Dolph is saying in the Avian post. But no, I don't think there's anything inherently about Avian that prevents it from doing things like that. Okay, this is Bevy stuff. Let's go to active 17. Block breaker, I think, is the one that we want to go into. Oh, I already had it open on a different monitor. Sweet. So let's do 0.17. Not using the branch anymore. This is now going to be 0.4. I assume we don't need this little derive more thing. This derive more thing was just like a out of date. Oh, maybe I should run cargo update or something first. So let's run this. I'm assuming that this will just work, but who knows? We don't do any of the force stuff. And this is a fairly small game overall. I think it's only like 300 lines of code. So we don't really use all that much of the Avian API surface. But it's always nice. So this is block breaker. It's got a paddle. It's got some bricks and stuff. It's like Arkanoid. It uses some observers for the on collision start. Probably have to rename. No, the rename already happened. What time is it? Okay, 9:30. This is going to take a second, so. Let's see. Rigid body static, collider rectangle. I don't think we're using anything here that is really important. Or anything that's going to be difficult to upgrade. We'll just let that run for a second. One of the other things that I want to do is I want to start a new Rust language series. So I might get started on stream for that today. I don't know. I want to do more Rust language development for Rust Adventure. So many crates, you've forgotten how big Bevy's depth tree is. Yeah, Bevy's depth tree is fairly big. I don't have any features disabled here. Right? It's just default everything plus Avian. So you're talking about a game engine and a physics library. It's a decent amount of depths. My computer's starting to get old too, so it's not helping. Bevy keeps splitting into more crates as well. But yeah, I mean, like game engines are complicated. I think that there's a couple of domains that I can think of where the depth trees are pretty deep, but for good reason. Game engines are one of them. I know web development, for various reasons, ends up requiring a lot of dependencies. And that's not like just the, oh, this weird library that was 2 lines got included or something like that. But like web actually does need quite a few dependencies. So things end up getting reasonably heavy. But every once in a while I'll get a break. Computer upgrade time, yes. I need to get another contract and then I can buy a computer. So while that builds, I also started doing a 2D visibility implementation based on the Red Blog Games one. The one thing that this post doesn't do a particularly great job of explaining how it's supposed to work. Because like this visualization feels off, for example. You do a sweep around, but realistically, you don't actually sweep. You just need a list of all the vertices. Do you know if anybody is working on hot reload in workspaces, not just main crate? I don't know if anybody is working on hot reload in workspaces. I think that it is like on the list for Dioxys. I don't know how important it is to Dioxys though. And I don't know. Let's see, Dioxys, CLI. Packages. I think there's going to be an issue in this repo from Jan. So let's do author. Why does author not work in this top search bar anymore? Can somebody tell me why author doesn't work anymore? So weird. Workspace. I feel like the search loads slowly. The access workspace, 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 workspace. I know that person. Maybe it's not in the repo. Maybe that's the issue. Anyway, there is an issue for it. I don't know if it's that one in particular, but I know that people care about it. But I don't know if anybody is like actively working on it at the moment. You've been resisting some partial upgrades and a new NAS because I don't need it, but yeah, my NAS is dying. My NAS started flaking on me. And I haven't had a moment to like figure out why. So this has all of the whatchamacallit, all the physics debug colliders on. This is just like a very, very, very basic version of like an Arkanoid or a block breaker or whatever. You can see that we don't even do we don't do calculations for the collision. We use an ellipse collider instead to get that like sideways bang off. There's also no end game. So I don't think if we clear all of the tiles that this will actually finish. But it's pretty reasonable. It's meant as like a beginner level workshop. So it's not really meant to be hard. You always just let it go and then respawn and do it again. I think some of the block collisions and stuff could be better, etc. But it works, which is great. And that's what we're looking for out of Avian. So this can actually get scripted and become a real workshop now. I think the physics debug plugin should probably be off by default. Oop, that's fun. Actually, the bottom area here needs to get a color on it. Where's the respawn area? Collider rectangle sprite color from with alpha. Is this not... Did I make this -1 on accident? When did I do that? Yeah, there we go. Whoa. There we go. I think one of the other things I want to do is actually change this. I don't mind that the paddle's inside of it, but like, it does feel a little weird. Could also give the bricks health, but I've noticed that for workshops, people tend to skip things basically immediately if it's not something they actually want to do. And this being a very beginner workshop, it is very easy to be like, hey, you should have a health on the brick. And when it hits, the health gets reduced instead of something else happening. So I'll be able to script this week. That'll go up, which is great. Snake is not done yet. Well, let me comment out physics debug plugin. Push that up. Cool. And then we have 2048. 2048 should be good to go. I don't think there's any more changes that are needed besides bumping the actual version here. Of course, this is going to do the same thing we just did, but yeah, the NAS is on its way out. I don't know if it's, well, actually, so the power cable had an issue the other day. The power cable popped and I had to get it replaced. And I think that either the hard drives are dead or the NAS is just done. And I haven't had a chance to actually look into it yet. Has everybody updated to 0.17 yet? What are y'all doing with your games at the moment? Was Avian the last dependency that y'all need? I feel like a lot of things have updated already. I think even Bevy Asset Loader is out now. I know that Skeen is out. Bevy ECS tile map, the stuff that I'm responsible for, is out for 0.17. Yeah. I really want to do like a quick Rust workshop. You're waiting for Lightyear? Okay, yeah. Lightyear's a pretty big one too. This is another one where like 2048 is like a reasonable game and we can totally add more here. We could have, you know, micro interactions and the tiles could pop in visually and stuff. But there's only so much that is like reasonable to put into a workshop. I think, what is this one? This one's a couple, like 800. Yeah, 750 lines of actual code, some of comments and stuff. So like, it's quite a bit. Why does this have a warning? Why does this have a warning that isn't checking, that isn't coming, cargo clippy? Why is it recompiling? That's weird, right? Running cargo clippy versus cargo run. You're depending on Bevy Tenua, which was depending on Avian 3, and you're going to replace it with a custom controller, then upgrade to 0.17. Yeah. I think Tenua is really cool. Tenua is really cool, especially for game jams and stuff. But I find myself gravitating towards writing my own custom kinematic character controllers or my custom character controllers in general as well. I think that controls of the character in general tend to be very important. What is this view? None should have snake case name, e.g. NONE. What? Is there no match here? What just happened? filter map, match, right? I think that's a false positive. I don't know why that was warning like that, because there's fundamentally nothing different. So this is 0.17 for 2048. Snake is a work in progress. The Bevy examples are also pretty up to date. I added a new one to the Bevy examples yesterday. Where's Bevy examples? I don't think this will run actually. There we go. So I added a cube sphere example to the Bevy examples. Not the official Bevy examples, just the repo that I have that's called Bevy examples, which is just an inflated cube. That's it. It's a cube sphere. It's nice for things like planets because it doesn't have like tight triangle groups at the poles. And then Bevy examples. I should continue that cartoon water one. This is an old VS Code. And then visibility 2D, I started working on as an example. I think that I'm going to do maybe 2 versions of visibility 2D. One version that is just building the meshes. And one version that might do something a little bit more like ray marching or something a little bit more GPU focused. We'll see. But Minesweeper is one of the workshops that we have to update now. Not Bevy examples, just go to the So 2048 block breaker. I need to label this. I'm really bad at labeling things. Where's the labels? Is this supposed to be topics? How did I have it on the other one? Hang on. Yeah, that's topics. Then Skeen has some work to do. WGPU for Bevy is not ready yet. Floppy Corgi is scripting currently. I'm deprecating some of these serverless things. I don't know if I'm going to go and change them to be AWS Lambda based, or if I'm just going to kill them entirely. Snake, Minesweeper, Asteroids. Infinite Pong might be a good one too. There's actually a whatchamacallit, tile map chunk implementation in Bevy now. So maybe we can redo the Pong and turn that into one too. Minesweeper is really cool because it's basically just a bunch of observers. A bunch of recursive observers, you spit them all out. Okay, so Floppy Corgi is currently being scripted, I think. Yeah, we're about 5 scripts in. I don't think I've pushed everything that I've written. but this will be done this week. Snake is going to be a little bit weirder. I really liked the idea of using some tile map chunks for Bevy Snake, but I'm not sure it entirely works out. So we'll see if it does. If it does, then it'll stay like that. Minesweeper doesn't have... So the thing about Minesweeper is it uses Bevy ECS tile map right now because Bevy ECS tile map has entities for tiles, which means that we can use observers to actually perform the logic. The tile map chunk implementation in Bevy core right now doesn't. So maybe like we don't need it to be a tile map. Let's see. GH repo, clone, Rust Adventure, Minesweeper. We don't need it to be a tile map. It was just kind of nice, right? Like it being a tile map had some nice properties. And this should just be 0.17, 0.9.2, 0.17. Bevy asset loader is not released yet. Let's check Bevy asset loader. Bevy asset loader. I thought Bevy asset loader was already released. Maybe it's not. Still 0.16. Bevy common assets is, I think. Yeah, Bevy common assets is 0.17. What are we using Bevy asset loader for here? Assets, asset loader, just the texture atlas outlet. I think we can just change this. This doesn't need to be that. We can make a texture atlas layout ourselves. The APIs have gotten better over time for Bevy. So let's do that. Texture atlas. It's used in a couple of demos. I think this one probably has the logic that we're looking for. This create texture atlas function. Here's a loaded folder. We won't actually have a folder, I don't think, because I already put this into like a sprite sheet. So we don't actually have a folder. We only need to load the one thing. It is released as an RC, the Bevy asset loader. Okay, maybe I just missed that. It is 24 RC1. Thank you, Christopher. Appreciate. So theoretically, this should just work. I think that the APIs for the things we're using other than Rand haven't really changed. Bevy ECS tile map, I can tell you because I maintain the library at this point that it hasn't changed. Bevy asset loader, I don't think had any major changes. Rand will have thread RNG to RNG and some trait rejiggering, but not any major changes. Maybe a couple of things like trigger will have to be changed, but we'll let the issues come up, and we'll fix them as they come up. Car alarms have been going for about 45 minutes now outside of my window. It's really wonderful. Highly suggest it. We don't need to enable state scoped entities anymore. Actually, that is on by default. which is wonderful. Minesweeper, I go back and forth on this, actually. I think that because the change got made in Bevy a while back, where the name of the window gets taken from the cargo toml, that changing the name of the window in every single workshop is not as relevant. So I think I'll just delete that. Assets plugin, again, it's really not doing all that much for us. It's like load a texture atlas. So I think we can write this ourselves either way. Just say the car alarms are Twitch alerts. Randomly thank people. Thank you. Thanks for the follow. Thanks for the follow. Thanks for the follow. Now it stops now that I'm treating it as a follow. I'm planning on doing a lot of work this week for Rust Adventure stuff, for workshops, and getting things up onto the website. I really want to redo this homepage too. We'll see how much of it I get done this week, but I'm thinking about streaming pretty much every day. And one of the things that I want to do for Rust Adventure is a Rust language intro for people who don't want to read the entire Rust book. All of the other pedagogical materials for Rust tend to be very long and drawn out and border on reference descriptions. Time for popcorn and biscardi. A lot of Rust pedagogical material for the language ends up being quite long. I'll mention the Rust book because like that's open and free and maintained and everybody knows what it is. But this is 22 chapters. I guess that's an appendix, so like call it 21. This is a lot. Like if you're somebody who knows another language and wants to get into writing like your first CLI tool or something, this is a lot. And the idea roughly being that you would like, a lot of people come to this and they go, I'm going to go through the whole thing front to back because I am presented with this content in this order. And I really think that we can avoid that. I think that we can compress this a little bit more. So the first thing I want to do for Rust Adventure this week is I want to do something that is for people who already know a language, JavaScript, Python, C, whatever it is, already knows a language, so that we don't have to go over like what is a function and what is a this and what is a that, and get pretty quickly into things like how to handle errors in Rust with options and results and things that are like concretely useful. Big mental model stuff in terms of like, here's some syntax, here's a hello world, of course, because like you have to see how to define a function at some point. But something that moves a little bit faster, something that's a little bit, and then maybe build on top of that with more referencey language stuff. I don't know yet. So let's get started here. There's a bunch of trigger targets and stuff. So trigger targets, right? This is reveal tile. Reveal tile is primary click and tile position. This is going to have to hold probably an entity. We're using it with trigger targets. So I think that reveal tile is only used with trigger targets. So if it's only used with trigger targets, actually we got to check pick reveal. Yeah, trigger targets. So reveal tile is an entity event, which means that we have to have an entity for our entity event. Now we only have one entity, so we'll just stick that here. But this is an observer. Let's see. Compute matrix got changed to toMatrix. Thank you, Rust Analyzer. This is going to be entity tile entity. And then we're going to get rid of the tile entity as the second argument, and we're going to get rid of targets. And now this is just commands.trigger reveal tile with the entity inside of it. This is the new 0.17 observers APIs. Same thing here. This has to become entity. I think this is next tile, right? Yep. And then trigger targets is not something we want, so we just want to trigger. It's already an entity event, so it'll take this entity and fire at that entity. And then distributions weighted index. What are we doing for weighted index? Let's start with thread RNG. Thread RNG became RNG. This is distributions weighted index. Do I need that? Let's see, what is this one? Gen is now a keyword. So it was renamed to random. Gen is a keyword as of Rust 2024. Scaling mode needs to come from somewhere else. Where's our scaling mode? No code actions available? Come on. Come on. This is in Bevy camera. Scaling mode. We obviously still have a bunch of warnings. Most of them are for whatchamacallit. Most of them are for triggers. So if we click in here, hopefully I don't immediately lose. But basically, I don't think I built in a redo to this one. So if you want to restart it, you got to restart it. Ooh, that's bright. So there's two connected to this, one connected to this. This is, of course, I lose immediately. I might just be bad at Minesweeper. I might be really bad at Minesweeper. I might be really bad at Minesweeper. Who clicks the first time and hits a bomb? Okay, 4, 1. I swear, it worked the first time. You all saw it. There we go. So you click on these tiles, and it will keep recursively firing this observer to clear all of the relevant tiles. And you can make this kind of as big or as small as you want in terms of like playing area size. I didn't build in a method for that, but it's easy enough to do. Let's say trigger, all of these need to be on. So trigger became on, which means that the word trigger should now be something else. So here we're going to just call all of these reveal tile. And target is going to become entity because it's now a field on the event. And this is going to be reveal tile dot entity. And that should run, and hopefully we have fewer warnings. course, I lose immediately. How do I keep click? There's got to be a percentage chance. What is it? What is the percentage likelihood that I click a bomb 3 times in a row? You can also right click so you can mark things. There's no way to like keep that mark if you got something correct or not, but it will show you if you did get it correct. Not terribly important, I don't think. I think this can be like, hey, if you want this to happen, figure out how to do it. Hey, Crods, how's it going? Just updating some stuff to Bevy 0.17. Beginning of the stream was Avian 0.4, which is out now and works very well. Had 0 issues updating. This is the other thing that I would like. I filed an issue for this on the Bevy repo, but it would be nice if we had like a cross selection for IVEC2s and also like a 3x3 selection without the center. So instead of just having like X or Y, you could have like axes or 3x3. And then this, you would just get this and be able to iterate over it. So that gives us this. This can go away. And I think this still works, right? Cool. I think that's it. I think this is done. Let's see if there's anything else that I can pick up. This is just the event. This is the system for running tile picking. Game state, startup menu playing. We don't have a menu, so I'd probably get rid of that. Cinemas often use a Minesweeper algorithm to handle their seating selection software. Really? I didn't know that at all. We don't really have an end game, I guess. We could implement like a restart, but how? This is another small one, right? This is like 300 in code. Yeah, 330. 330 is, I think, perfect for this. I don't want to make it too complicated. And not complicated as in like the thing is complicated, but complicated as in like it has a bunch of like unrelated other stuff. Because I've found that people only go through things that they really want to go through. And they will get rid of everything else. Cool. Assets plugin. We could probably get rid of Bevy asset loader here. I think we could get rid of Bevy asset loader here. I don't know that it's doing all that much for us because we don't have all that much for it to do. If we get rid of it, then we have to have a system responsible for loading that stuff. So it's like positives and negatives, you know? I think we're good here. Let's check game state and see if there's any actual usages of menu. Next menu. I guess we do have a transition to start menu. On enter startup, setup, spawn board, transition to start menu. Start menu doesn't really do anything, I want to say. So we need to fix that. We either need a like start button to restart the game, or we need to get rid of that. In the meantime, I think I'm just going to commit this. Oh, I need to GCO be 0.17 first. Let's call this Bevy 0.17. That's what I usually call these. Origin Bevy 0.17 push Hoifix. So that leaves us with what? About 10 o'clock. I could either go through and update more of the workshops. What else do we have? We have Snake. Snake is a little bit of a rough one. Got to decide what to do with Snake. Floppy Corgi is already being scripted. Minesweeper is done. Asteroids. Let's check out Asteroids. I think we didn't update Asteroids to be particularly workshoppy. It's one of the newer ones. It's one of the newer ones that we didn't necessarily, at least your professor said so. Always trust your professor, right? That's how that works. Okay, so this is a full thing. This is like everything. This is an old example that hasn't been updated in a bit. You can see that because it's using XPBD. There's quite a bit in here. The question is, do we want to update this? Or is this better off being rewritten? This is currently 3,000 lines of code. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on here between movement and meteors and stuff. Maybe I update this as a demo more than a workshop. I think 3,000 lines is too big for a workshop. Unless you're skipping quite a bit. I don't remember the logic in this one being particularly difficult to handle. But there is quite a bit going on, and I'm not sure everybody actually wants to do it. I feel like I remember doing a different asteroids implementation with just gizmos. Let's see if I put that in active. Asteroids. Yeah, that looks right. Let's get rid of the old version and take a look at this one. I don't know what branch the other one was on. It was the old branch for sure. Yep, this is the one I was working on. Let's see, this is currently 0.16. So we don't have any other stuff in here. Let's make sure that this is committable. Do we run it first? I don't know. This one's significantly smaller though. Let's see. This one is 500 lines of code. And it's all in one file. So let's just take a scan through and see what this is about. We've got ships shooting, collision layers, timers for shooting. I think this whole thing, if I remember correctly, is done with gizmos. Some observers for colliders, custom command for spawning new asteroids. This seems like it'll be pretty reasonable to update, actually. Rotational movement and linear movement haven't changed. Wrapping movement wouldn't have changed. Life counter and stuff. Maybe we get rid of that. Maybe we don't. I feel like lives are a pretty critical part of asteroids. So let's just bump this. I think I already did the commit, right? Yeah. So 4, 17, 30. 9.29. We'll do 9. Cargo update. This one has quite a few dependencies. Are we actually using Glam directly like that? No, we are not. We don't need Glam as like a specific. I don't think we do anyway, unless we need to enable RAND. We'll check that. Where are we doing our RNG? Velocity F32, Vec2 from angle. Gen on single F32s. We're not using Glam's RAND feature. So we'll just get rid of that. What do Glam do? Avian has been updated for 0.17. Yes. Avian 0.4 is out. You can go use it now. What do Glam do? Glam is a Vec and matrix kind of crate. It's pretty fundamental when it comes to Bevy. So a couple of different Vec types, a couple of different component sizes is the way they'll frame it. There's SIMD, there's matrices. But really, most of the time when you're dealing with Bevy stuff, you're dealing with like a Vec3. And that's because transform is everywhere. So typically, you don't need to bring in Glam independently, right? If I look for Vec3 and I'm in Bevy math Vec3. But if I look at the source, I believe this will actually be Glam. Yeah. So this is Glam if we look at the source, but it's presented as Bevy math Vec3. So every Bevy app uses Glam, and it uses it for these vector types and stuff. Bevy dev tools. Are we using dev tools right now? Gravity, Slate. Maybe for the UI stuff. Log transitions is always nice. Collision events enabled. I think we can get rid of. Maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. That's an Avian thing. Compiling my 5th Bevy app of the stream. That car alarm is still going off. App state, game over, fixed update. I think this is a pretty reasonable setup. I think that the gizmos, the The gizmos deserve a chance in the spotlight to be used. I think that teaching people how to use gizmos in other workshops is kind of just like extra, right? Like if you're doing things and you're rendering them and you're putting meshes on the screen, yes, you can use gizmos to visualize things and whatnot, which is awesome. But if you actually want to use like the full set of gizmo APIs, I think that deserves its own dedicated workshop. And asteroids, I feel like benefits from the aesthetic. What did they call the laser line drawing displays that asteroids used to be played on? What VS Code theme is this? This is Night Owl. Night Owl by Sarah. Night Owl by Sarah Drosner. I really like it. I've been using it for a very long time at this point. Oh yeah, vector displays. Yes. Yeah. I think that the gizmos give kind of the same kind of aesthetic. You wish you had a vector. Is that what they called the displays? I don't actually know. So we've got to do trigger updates. I don't want to call any of the events trigger because Bevy upstream is kind of moving away from calling all of these triggers trigger. And instead calling them whatever the event actually is. Hey, Xjob, how's it going? What are you up to today? Yeah. I realized that you're saying that about Night Owl, Jacob. I think I just know that you use it. Are you streaming this week, Jacob? Ooh, we use external force here. We get to use the new force APIs. Okay. This is exciting now. I'm more excited about this. So fixed horizontal. Unfortunately, Rust Analyzer can't help with this scaling mode. And the name didn't get changed for 0.17, I don't think. It got changed for 0.18. Went in like basically just after. State scope is now despawn on exit. I want to say it's despawn on exit. Let's check. Despawn on exit, yes. I love deprecation. I love that we can do that. Okay, let's start with this and this. Despawn on exit. And then we were using this in kind of a weird way. Despawn on exit, app state, game over. That still works. It's just a rename. Cool. Lasers are the common modern kind of vector displays, but historically vector displays work by searing the beam of a CRT instead of raster scanning it. Cool. I'm not super familiar with like old display technologies. I'm like aware of them, but I don't like really know, you know? Oh, you're not streaming work splits your schedule? That's unfortunate. Pairing and teaching folks with the new client, yeah. Video shorts, that would work well too. Did a stream on GitHub's channel on Friday for a work project. Nice. What are the new Avian external force things? Can't wait to update your current project. We went over Avian earlier. Apparently this is when they come right up next to my window with a weed whacker. So external force, impulse, angular impulse, etc. These used to be things that you could put on entities, and you would have to specify whether they were persistent or not for whether the forces were like applied and then removed automatically or kept around for a longer period of time. These APIs have been completely reworked in Avian 0.4. So there are now components for constant forces. So if there's a constant force, if the component is on the entity, the force is being applied, which is really nice. No more persistent, unpersistent kind of, flipping back and forth. There's also a query data helper for forces. Forces gives you some APIs that you can use to apply a force. So where are we? How much more do we have here? Have I tried Rust Rover IDE? I have not. I don't know really anything about Rust Rover. I know some people use it and some people like it. That's about where my knowledge of Rust Rover ends. I think if I wasn't using VS Code, I would probably be using Emacs, or I would switch to NeoVim at this point. I do kind of like Emacs in general. I really like having a programmable editor. I tried Zed a long time ago. I tried Zed even when they were in beta. I think I even have it still installed. Yeah, I still have it installed. Haven't opened it in a long time. Specifically because when I'm on stream, I need certain things to be true. I need theming to be able to be done, which in the past was not something you could do. You couldn't have a custom theme in Zed in the past. You can now, I believe, but that was not always true. The other things were the fonts weren't big enough, so people wouldn't be able to read them and you couldn't zoom in on them. So you could zoom in on certain things, but you couldn't zoom in on the UI text. My understanding is there's also a configuration for that somewhere now as well. But if you can see, like, this is technically VS Code, and I have basically everything stripped out to the point where you can't even really tell it's VS Code, right? I usually have these top icons gone too. But like, it doesn't look that much different from my actual terminal, except it has lines on the side and tabs on the top. So that's kind of like what I want out of an editor. I do really like Zed's like rip-grep modification search though. That is really cool. Where they do like you can basically do an editor search and it will give you all of the little segments with like, a couple lines around them. And you can use that as a file and change them all right there. That is really cool. I really liked that. But I'm not a fan of AI at all. And they push AI pretty hard. So I have no real reason to go back to look at them at this point. You always presume that if you didn't have fancy window handling, that you would have to switch out of VS Code already. That you would have switched out. Oh, you always presume that if I didn't have fancy window handling, I would have switched out of VS Code already. Maybe. I really like the window handling that I have here. It would be very hard for me to go back and not have it. Well, we don't talk like that here. So goodbye. So triggers need to become on. These triggers can all just go to underscores. On collision start and whatnot are not going to be relevant anymore. And then we're going to be left with external force pretty much at the end of this. So let's do the thread RNG. Thread RNG became RNG. Gen became random. Gen range became, and I knew this one. I've done this a couple of times now. I can't remember what it was changed to. Gen range became random range. Yeah, random range. Thank you. Ooh, is finished? Oh, is finished. Okay, that's fine. I was worried that we got rid of the ability to check for a timer like that. So target. So this is probably going to be entity. Let's do on collision start is collision start. Target is almost certainly always going to be entity. Oh, what? Okay, let's back that change out. Let's do one change here. And I think we're gonna have to figure out which one this is. So collision start. This is, we jumped into the Avian source code, by the way, if anybody is confused by what I just did. The entity of the collider that started colliding with collider 2, for observers watching this event as an entity event, this is the target entity. The entity of the collider that's starting colliding with collider 1. So this is the target entity. So what are we despawning here? We are despawning when we shoot. If a collision starts, we want to despawn collider 1. I think collider 1 is the right thing because this is being fired on the event. We have an observer on the bullet, so when the bullet hits something, collision or collision start, fires, that observer triggers, we remove the thing. So probably similar for others. So collision start, target, this is going to be collider 1 again. These are also going to be collider 1 again. And then we're left with external force. So let's take a look at external force. 0 with persistence, false. So we're not persistent. So we're going to be using the query parameter, I think, right? Well, actually, this is 0 because we wanted to set it later. So linear movement was external force, ship gave us force, apply force. So I think we're going to end up using the same API, but this is going to be forces now. And I don't think it needs to be a shared reference because it's query data. You got your shader working, just had to use your brain, and you have a cool pixelate and fade away material. Sick. Congratulations. Nice job. Did you jump it in the showcase channel yet? So that works there. I don't think we need external force here anymore. This is on the ship. So we don't need the component, right? If the API we're using is the query API. So there we go. So I think this is pretty reasonable for like, you know, a couple hundred lines of code. There's a little, you know, is it the perfect asteroids implementation? No. Is it supposed to be? Also no. You know, this isn't going up on Steam or anything. I think I should be able to crash into one of these. If I catch up to one of them. Missed. I'm terrible at video games. Come on, crash, crash, crash. There we go. So we don't really have particles or anything. I guess we could do something with particles. I think you have 4 lives right now because I didn't do the, yeah. Then we get another one. Yada, yada, yada. Boink. So it doesn't really explode, but it kind of floats off screen. You want it on Steam? I don't know that this deserves to go on Steam. This is just some gizmos. I think this is pretty reasonable. This is gizmo assets. This is gizmos for the shots. This is gizmos for the whatchamacallits, asteroids. And overall, this works out pretty well. And it teaches you about how to use gizmos and stuff, which is cool. So let's do a scan through this and see if there's any kind of like outdated patterns. Oh, we could stick on the physics debug too at the moment. Just to see what it looks like. I think it looks exactly the same as the gizmos, honestly. Which it does. Yeah, definitely put that in showcase for sure. So physics debug plugins, everything seems fine. Everything seems good. Gravity is 0, lives, current level. We don't have any visualization for the lives. I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. I think people will skip it if we do it. We could just have a text and update it with the number. That would be pretty reasonable. Just like text in the bottom right that just says like lives left number. Let's see, fixed update, init state, physics plugins, spawning, check end level stuff, scoped entities. Do we need to do this? I feel like this is on by default. Yeah, it's on by default. We don't need this macro anymore. Orthographic projection, we pick a canvas size, current level. So if you do actually pass the level, it will spawn more. Let's finish a level here. They're really missing asteroids. Okay. We don't have cycling for the bullets. It's only really for the ship and the asteroids. So then you get 2. Now you're on level 2. So, I mean, we could display which level you're on somewhere. We could display how many lives you have left somewhere. I don't think I'm going to implement like any large amount of scoring or anything like that. But overall, pretty good. So despawn on exit. We've got observer. Children, gizmos, observe, check sub. This probably needs to be handled a little bit differently, but that's fine. Trigger despawn, trigger spawn ship, lives, defaults, start game resets some stuff and triggers some observers. Wrapping movement is in here, viewport rolled to 2D. That's always a fun one. Linear movement is the propulsion. Rotational movement is the other keys. I think this is pretty good. I don't see anything inherently wrong with this. Anything out of date anyway. Anything that would have worked in 0.16 and doesn't work in or shouldn't work in 0.17. Have I ever tried to release compiled Bevy game or .app? You wonder what the process looks like. You should make a game with Necrons. No quest line and lore cutscenes. Yes. I'll throw in not Yaw Snippet. What is it? Yarn Spinner. We'll have a bunch of cutscenes where a ship stands on two legs and talks to another ship. I haven't shipped to Steam yet. I want to. I don't have something that I feel like is worth shipping at the moment to Steam. I've pushed some stuff to itch. I should push these up in different places as packaged apps. I feel like that would be useful, but that would probably be one central repo packaging them all up. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I think that there are some interesting things that I would like to do. Like most of these are going to be deployable on the web. So I would like to host them on the Rust Adventure website so that I can send people like, I don't know, asteroids.rustadventure.dev and it'll show and play asteroids or something like that. I just haven't gotten around to setting that up yet. I do all of the work on all of the Rust Adventure stuff, including the website infrastructure and whatnot. So it's a trade-off between, do I make more material, right? Workshops, scripts, posts, videos, either videos on Rust Adventure or videos on YouTube, shorts, etc. Or do I improve the infrastructure? Those are just two competing interests. I didn't push this at all, ever, actually. So let's rename this branch to something else. This is like a full sprite-driven version with Bevy Hanabi particles and stuff. Which is cool. And I would like to keep around, but I don't necessarily want it to be front and center. Can I rename this branch here? Default branch, repository name, rename branch. Rename main to what do we call this version of it? With graphics, maybe? Will be named to with graphics shortly. Okay, so I could have just done that myself, right? Let's get our thing here. Get remote, add origin this. Get push u origin main. I want to rename the branch, or not rename the branch, sorry, switch to another branch. I want to switch it back to main. So the asteroids version is now, or the gizmos version is now there, and the other version is also there. Cool. Good to go. So this is pretty good. This is 600 lines of Rust. So slightly longer, but still under my 1,000 cap. I like to keep things under 1,000. I think once I start getting to 1,000, the workshops start getting to be like 2, 3, 4, 5 hours long. And those are just very, very, very long and draining on people. Yeah. So we've got asteroids, we've got 2048, we've got Blockbreaker, Snake is in the pipeline, we've got Minesweeper, Infinite Pong, I don't really need to update. I could just do that randomly. This isn't going to become a workshop, I don't think. Maybe, maybe not. Floppy Corgi already in scripting. Snake is, I think, the hardest one to update right now. I tried to use tilemap chunk in Snake, and I haven't finished porting it yet. But all of that's good. So I'm happy with that. 2048. This is, yeah. Should probably pin some of the, I guess this week in Bevy and Skeen should probably be pinned. Ray tracing can go. Bevy examples. I don't know that I want the workshops to be there first. Let's go with that. I think that's good. I don't think there's other things that I really want to put at the top. So Bevy examples, something that people go to quite a bit. First Rust CLI is just like the first CLI workshop, like the first Rust workshop, more or less. Skeen, also something that people come here for. This week in Bevy, also something that people come here for. Fairly small star counts, but I'm happy with that. All right. I am going to end stream there. I'm probably going to do another stream tomorrow morning. So I'll be back. But I've got to do some This Week in Bevy data entry. So I can get the This Week in Bevy video out. So thanks everyone for hanging out. And I will see you probably tomorrow morning. Have a great rest of your day.